Imagine moving into a new home, hoping for a fresh start, a place where your children can play, where you can sleep peacefully at night. A quiet street, a small, unassuming house, nothing out of the ordinary, or so it seems. That's exactly what LaToya Ammons, her mother, Rosa Campbell, and her 3 children thought when they moved into a rental house on Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana, in November of 2011. They were like any other family, laughing, settling in, unpacking boxes. It was supposed to be the beginning of something new, but within weeks, something changed. The house had a presence, a heavy, suffocating air that seemed to grow thicker at night. Objects shifted when no one was looking. Footsteps echoed from the basement, slow, deliberate, heavy. And then the flies came. At first, it was just a few. Then hundreds of black flies swarmed the porch, dead of winter, when no flies should exist. No matter how many they killed, they always came back. Still, LaToya tried to ignore it. She was a mother first. She told herself it was just an old house, just the cold, just creaky pipes. She was wrong, because soon something would reveal itself, something watching them, something that had no intention of letting them leave. Just before we go into the details of this story, I need you to understand that we have put a lot of work into researching, scripting, and editing this video for your consumption. And the only gift we need from you in return is your subscription to this channel. If you've already done that, thank you very much. You are the reason why we still work very hard on this channel. Now, let's get cracking. December 2011. The Ammons family had only been in the house for a few weeks when they noticed something was off. It started with the flies. A swarm of thick black flies infested the screened-in porch. It didn't make sense. It was the dead of winter, too cold for insects to survive. But no matter how many they killed, they always came back. Then came the footsteps. The sounds came at night. Heavy footsteps rising from the basement. Then the creak of the door opening. No matter how many times she locked it, the door would always open again. And then one night, she saw it. Wet boot prints. Something had entered their home, and it was only getting started. It started with the children. At first, small changes, moments LaToya brushed off as exhaustion, stress, or just kids being kids. But then, the voices changed. At times, her children would speak in deep, unnatural tones, voices that didn't belong to them. Their eyes would darken, their expressions twisted into something cruel. And then there was the closet. One night, LaToya heard her 7-year-old son whispering in the dark. When she stepped closer, she realized he wasn't alone. He was talking to someone inside the closet. His voice was calm, casual, like he was talking to a friend, but there was no one there. She asked him who he was speaking to. He turned his head slowly and smiled. "The boy who lives in the closet," he said. The air felt thick, suffocating. LaToya swallowed her fear and asked again, "What boy?" Her son blinked, staring straight through her, and then he spoke, his voice hollow, emotionless. "He told me what it feels like to die." LaToya felt her stomach drop. She couldn't breathe. She grabbed her son, pulling him away from the closet, but he started screaming, thrashing violently, his little hands clawing at the air. That was the first time she felt it, a presence, watching, waiting. Then came March of 2012. It was 2 in the morning when Rosa Campbell woke up to the sound of something scraping against the walls, a slow, dragging noise. She rushed to check on the children, but when she entered her granddaughter's room, her heart stopped. LaToya's 12-year-old daughter was floating. Her body was stiff, her arms at her sides, her face frozen in an expression of pure terror. She wasn't awake. She wasn't moving, but she was levitating above the bed. Rosa screamed for LaToya. The two women fell to their knees, praying, their voices shaking, tears streaming down their faces. And then it was over. The girl collapsed onto the bed with a sickening thud. She gasped for air, her body jerking violently as she woke up, her eyes darting around the room. She had no memory of what had happened. From that night on, the children began hearing a voice. It whispered to them in the dark. It told them it was going to kill them. The 12-year-old girl woke up gasping for air, clutching at her throat. She cried, shaking, barely able to get the words out. It was choking me. I could feel its hands. LaToya knew then this wasn't just a haunting. Something was inside her children, and it wanted them dead. Latia Emmons was out of options. Her children were being attacked, choked, lifted into the air. Something had infected their home. She turned to the churches in town, desperate for help. But when she explained what was happening, the voices, the levitation, the shadows moving through the house, most of them turned her away. Some didn't believe her. Others didn't want to get involved. But finally, one church listened. One priest took her aside, his face grave. He told her the words she feared the most: "Your house is haunted." And then he told her what she had to do. The family was instructed to clean the house with ammonia and bleach to purge whatever was inside. They had to draw crosses in oil on every door and window, sealing the home in the name of God. Then they had to burn sage and sulfur throughout the house. The smoke meant to drive the spirits away. LaToya followed the instructions carefully, moving from room to room, chanting prayers covering the walls in oil and smoke. The air felt lighter. The house seemed calm. For the first time in weeks, the family slept without waking up screaming, but then it got worse. The next night, the footsteps came back, louder, heavier. The basement door slammed open with a deafening crack. The children's voices deepened again. Their eyes rolled back, their bodies contorted. Whatever was inside the house was angry. The cleansing had only made it stronger. LaToya Emmons was terrified. The church couldn't stop it. The prayers weren't working. Her children were getting worse. She needed help, medical help. She took them to Dr. Jeffrey Onyekwu, hoping for answers. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was a mental illness. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a logical explanation. But there wasn't. The moment they entered the doctor's office, the children changed. Their eyes bulged, their faces twisted into snarls, their voices deepened, growling, speaking in tones that no child should ever make. Then, the youngest boy was lifted off the ground. Thrown, he slammed against the wall with such force that the entire room froze in horror. The doctor and nurses backed away, their faces pale. They weren't dealing with sick children. They were dealing with something else. Someone called 911, and soon Child Protective Services was involved. The CPS worker arrived at the hospital, skeptical at first. But what she saw that day would haunt her forever. She stood beside the 9-year-old boy, watching him carefully. His grandmother, Rosa, held his hand, and then he grinned, and in one swift, impossible motion, He walked backward up the wall. 1 step, 2, 3, straight up the hospital wall. He flipped over his grandmother's head, landed perfectly on his feet without ever letting go of her hand. The CPS worker staggered back, speechless. A nurse screamed, "This wasn't a trick. This wasn't imagination. This was real." And now, professionals had witnessed it firsthand. Whatever had taken hold of LaToya Ammons' children was getting stronger. Her boys no longer sounded like themselves. When they spoke, their voices were deep, guttural, filled with rage. They began threatening adults, hissing words no child should know. One night, her youngest son turned to her, his face blank, his voice hollow. "You will die soon." Then came the convulsions, their bodies twisted unnaturally, their spines arching, their limbs bending at angles that shouldn't be possible. Foam dripped from their mouths. Then, just as suddenly, they would go completely still. No breathing, no blinking. It was as if they were gone. And then, without warning, they would wake up laughing. Not normal laughter. Something else. Something mocking. A CPS report described the children's behavior in a single word: possessed. And then the attack started on LaToya. She woke up to burning scratches across her body, bruises that hadn't been there the night before. She had spent weeks fighting for her children. Now it was coming for her. LaToya Ammons had tried everything. Doctors, social workers, the police. Nothing stopped the attacks. There was only one option left: the Catholic Church. Unlike the others, the church took her seriously. After reviewing the evidence, witness reports, medical records, and the CPS investigation, they made a decision. They assigned Father Michael Maginot, a priest trained in exorcisms. The moment he stepped into the house, he felt it, a heavy, suffocating darkness. He began to pray, sprinkling holy water throughout the home. The reaction was instant. The children screamed, their bodies jerked violently. One of the boys collapsed, writhing in pain. Father Maginot had seen enough. This was no ordinary haunting. He performed a minor exorcism on LaToya, praying over her, commanding whatever was inside to leave. But it didn't. Instead, the attacks intensified. The house groaned. The children convulsed. Objects moved on their own. The church had no choice. They approved a full exorcism, something they almost never do, because they knew this wasn't just a ghost. This was something else. The church had given approval. The battle for LaToya Ammons' soul was about to begin. June 2012. Father Michael Maginot prepared for the first exorcism. He stood over LaToya, Bible in hand, his voice steady as he recited the prayers. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave this woman." LaToya sat still, too still. Her eyes were closed, her breathing was low. Then she smiled. A slow, unnatural grin. The first exorcism did nothing. A second attempt, again in English. This time, she twitched violently. Her hands clenched into fists, her lips curled back, exposing her teeth. But the presence inside her didn't leave. Father Maginot made a decision. The third exorcism would be performed in Latin. As soon as the first words left his mouth, LaToya's body stiffened. Her head snapped back, her mouth opening wide in a soundless scream. Then suddenly she spoke. But it wasn't her voice. It was something else. A deep guttural growl erupted from her throat. The language, not English, not Latin, something ancient, something unknown. Her body convulsed violently, shaking the chair. The priest's voice grew louder, stronger. "Tell me your name." Silence. Then a low hiss.
No.
The air grew thick, heavy, suffocating. The lights in the room flickered. The walls creaked. Father Maginot pressed on. He would not stop. The battle continued for hours. Latoya thrashed against an invisible force, her body locking, seizing, twisting. The growls turned to screams, inhuman, deafening. And then she collapsed. The room fell silent. Her breathing slowed. The tension in her muscles melted away. And just like that, it was over. The presence was gone. The battle was over. After months of terror, attacks, and exorcisms, Latoya Ammons did the only thing left to do. She took her children and left. They moved far from Carolina Street, far from the nightmares that had haunted them. And the moment they left, the activity stopped. No more voices, no more footsteps, no more screaming in the night. But the house, it remained empty. Neighbors whispered about it. No one wanted to live there. Some swore they still saw shadows moving behind the windows. Others said they could hear whispers if they walked too close at night. Then in 2014, the house was demolished. The walls that had trapped something evil were finally gone. But even now, many believe that whatever had lived inside that house never left. It's just waiting for someone new. What happened to Latoya Ammons and her family should have been impossible, but it wasn't. Too many witnesses, police officers, doctors, CPS workers saw it with their own eyes. They confirmed what most people refused to believe. This was real. The Indianapolis Star broke the story, and soon it spread worldwide. People couldn't ignore the evidence. The hospital records, the police reports, the sworn testimonies. Then, in 2018, Zach Bagans, host of Ghost Adventures, bought the house. He wanted answers. His investigation shook him to his core. He spent one night inside, and then he demolished it. Even he refused to let it stand. But the story didn't end there. In 2024, Netflix released The Deliverance, a horror film based on the case. Because what happened in that house wasn't just a ghost story, it was one of the most terrifying possessions ever documented. And to this day, no one knows if the evil truly left. Was it real? Some believe this was a true case of demonic possession, one of the most terrifying ever documented. Others insist there had to be a logical explanation, a psychological or medical condition that went undiagnosed. But one fact remains: too many people saw the impossible. Doctors, nurses, police officers, social workers, a priest. All of them witnessed things that defied reality. A child walking backward up a wall, a mother convulsing, speaking in unknown languages, unseen hands choking a little girl in her sleep. No hoax could explain all of it. And that's why, even now, the Ammons possession case remains one of the most terrifying and well-documented hauntings in modern history. Real or not, the story still lingers, and whatever was inside that house may still be waiting